I'm going to introduce my CEO to address us quickly. Certainly man of no introduction. He's a trade investment specialist. Personally, for me, working for him, it's a revelation to the AIDC and the Eastern Cape province and the automotive sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hussein. Good morning. I didn't pay Hussein to say that, but thank you for the warm welcome. I'm sure there's more people joining us. And thank you very much for making time. We decided last year that we're gonna have to start creating these types of conversations, because on the one end we are guiding policy imperatives that are seeking to promote the automotive industry. On the other side, we are trying to provide support to the private sector, particularly suppliers. So this is our fourth, if I'm not mistaken, or fifth Indaba since the beginning of last year. And we are getting a lot of valuable inputs from a number of stakeholders who make time to gather with us and give us their expert opinions on the subject matter. We're very glad to have the DTIC represented by Mr. Lotta, who will assist us maybe on the update on the policy process, which is a very critical instrument to ensuring that the automotive industry remains in the country. I'm mentioning him in particular because everything else falls smoothly from there if that policy process is put in place. But we've got a number of other experts who are here, people who've been with the auto sector for much longer than I have been. Certainly, Hussein, for instance, has been in the sector for 40 years. I wasn't born then. So we take a lot of lessons and learnings from a person like Hussein in our midst. We're very fortunate to have him with us. The province's posture at the moment is looking very favorable. We are at a stage where the provincial government is actually wanting to know what is it that it could do to assist the industry. So these types of conversations give us the ammunition to advise the province. As most of you would know, we have 3 provinces that host the sector. I think if we do not transition towards the EV as the Eastern Cape, we stand to lose more than the other 2 provinces. Our economy is not as diversified as Gauteng, as KZN. So the risk is too high for us not to attend to the transition period. So that's why we asked to come. Sorry, that's why we asked you to come and advise us how we can best position our provincial government. With those few words, I was asked to welcome, right, Hussein? Please welcome. As Hussein said, we had a memorial service yesterday here. If any of you were with us in our first event last year, in fact, all 4 events, there's a young lady running around here who was helping organize our event. So we were very saddened, we still are saddened, but we opted to celebrate his life with us much more than we were feeling aggrieved by the fact that she's gone. So I want to repeat that messages of support would be welcome so that we could share the pain with the family. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you, CEO, what you did with this. But really, we had 43 entities RSVP for this event. And you can see the panel members that we've got. There are so many people that wants to talk about this topic. I think the country needs to discuss this very topic. So I'm not going to say more about that, except that I want to talk about our next young man. He is only 22 years in industry, not 40, or is it 45? So Karel Snyman, certainly we call him an EV pioneer. I think he calls himself an EV pioneer in solar. So Karel has had some engagements. I've been in sort of meetings with him before. So really somebody that understands this, and it's something that maybe Karel will share with us that hasn't started yesterday. So there's a bio for Karel. You can see that in 1988, Karel joined the National Energy Council. In 2013, he enjoyed, they're stealing my, hello. In 2013, he joined I don't know who Zanedi is, but Karel will share that as a general manager for Cleaner Mobility Program. So Karel's been around and he's been part of the electric vehicle long before we knew about an electric vehicle. So please, Karel, welcome.
Thank you, Zane. That's a kind welcome, and I feel welcome already because it's not my first time that I'm here with you guys. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your time. Thank you. I find myself on a long and winding road. And those of you who've been around long enough would know that's a song of the Beatles. But here we are today, and we're going to talk about this road, but not about the past as much as I'm going to talk. I think our conversations around the roundtable will be about the future. But I would like to provide the past as a bit of a foundation and a context so that we can prepare the future together in a proper way. It's always better to understand what you've done and what has happened before if you want to create something new. So I'm going to be on this long and winding road a little bit and share some of my experiences with you. Can we move to the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk about the long journey, not just the one driving down here, because I've been driving down here with my electric car, but also the journey from Kimberley to Cape Town. And I will explain why I'm using Kimberley and why I'm using Cape Town. And then the trip to this table. We had many stops and starts. I will also stop and start a little bit. Then I would like to talk about the canvas that we are facing now. We have a canvas in front of us that we need to paint on. We need to paint that picture. And I think today we'll be having more discussions regarding that. Is this better? Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. These are pictures of electric vehicles in South Africa. It's not complete. These are the ones that you maybe do not know of. The one top left-hand corner, that's an electric vehicle in the museum in Kimberley. You would know Kimberley had a history of being first with electricity in the city. And I think that might be the first electric car that came to South Africa, I think it's been imported. And the one on the right to that is a vehicle that was part of the first electric vehicle program that we had in South Africa at the CSIR. That's a Jurgen's Caravan type of electric vehicle. And then the others are vehicles that I was involved in at Eskom. The Land Rover on the left, the Corsa that was my commuting car, the Ford Bantam, the Volkswagen shuttle bus, the game viewing vehicle, the small utility vehicle that was exhibited in France in 2002, April. A small utility vehicle. It was quite popular then. We had the corner stand of the DTI in South Africa at that time, and then a three-wheeler vehicle on just above the tank. The tank was developed by Denel in South Africa, a military vehicle, a hybrid vehicle, still with nickel metal hydride batteries in those days. The batteries that we used in electric vehicles were all lead acid batteries. So my range in that little Corsa there was only 60 to 80 kilometers, depending on how I drive. So you can imagine the range anxiety that I had to deal with. Anyway, next slide, please. Driving down here, that is areas where we charge our vehicles. You will see the charger on the left provided by Audi, managed by Grid Cars at, where's this? Colesberg. That's Colesberg as you enter Colesberg on the left-hand side, Caltex Garage. And on the right in Janssenville, I thought that was a nice picture with the windmill, the old car and the new car in the picture. So driving down with an electric vehicle from Midrand, where I come from, to Gqeberha, you have to charge the vehicle every, say, 250, 200 kilometers. Chargers are placed about 200 kilometers apart from each other. So it's quite easy to do that, not difficult, but not always that easy if you deal with stage 6 load shedding. But anyway, that's the journey that I've been on for the past 2 days to get to this table. Next slide, please. In terms of my numbers, I've traveled about 1,200 kilometers. On average, I consumed 12 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That's 144 kilowatt hours. That's 520 megajoules of energy, and at a cost of about 850 Rand. That's what it cost me to get here. If I was traveling in a BMW 3 Series, I would have consumed about 8.2 liters per 100 kilometers. That's 99 liters. That's 3,150 megajoules of energy. You can see the energy is about 6 times more. And the cost is at least 3 times more. So that's one of the main reasons why we drive electric vehicles, but that's just one. Let's move on to the next slide, please. If I had a fleet of 5 million cars, and I guess that's about our petrol car fleet in South Africa now, then the difference is between 22 billion rands to 168 billion rands. You can see that's a massive difference in money for transportation. And if you look at public transportation in South Africa, the percentage of your take-home pay, that is to the people that use public transport. If those taxis, those buses were electric, this is the saving that could have been passed on to the passengers. Move on, please. I only have about 10 minutes, I think. So in terms of a macroeconomic benefit, just taking this difference between the price of your transportation cost, there's a almost 170 billion Rand increase in dispensable income to people, to the population of South Africa. And the multiplier effect of that can be huge in a country like South Africa. And then 80 billion savings in foreign exchange leaving our country. That is oil that, or currently refined product, petrol and diesel that we don't have to import anymore. But of course, there's also ESCOM. We're sitting in one time zone, and the benefit to that would be off-peak electricity because most people charge their vehicles at home and at night. And that could have been new sales to ESCOM. I'm saying could have been because I'm not sure how damaged ESCOM is today for that benefit to be passed on to ESCOM. It might be that we'll have to reinvent ESCOM and the grid and all these type of things in the nearby future. But then there's also the loss of taxes on fuel to government, and that's what government maybe is worried about. And if you look at the comparison between the 74 billion that's lost in terms of taxes, it's smaller than even just the foreign exchange leaving our country. So I think we can easily handle those type of things. Not directly like comparison I'm making now because the two are not connected, but there are ways and means to make these things cancel out each other. Then of course you have cleaner air in the cities. But there are many other benefits, but I don't have much time to go into that. Next slide, please. The South African timeline, really, I mean, the vehicle in Kimberley was the first one, but I don't know too much about that. I wasn't born in those days yet, although I have a history of more than 33 years in this area. The first program was at the CSIR, the electric vehicle program in the 70s, and that's where we started with the development of the lithium-ion battery technology, but also the zinc or the sodium nickel chloride technology, the Gqeberha battery that was developed in South Africa as well. So we were quite active at the CSIR with that, not myself, but the people that were there. Then I really got involved at the National Energy Council, and after that, the ESCOM electric vehicle program, and that's where all these vehicles were converted, developed, and built, and used in real life cycles. I mean, the game viewing vehicle was used in the Kruger National Park. The Combi shuttle was used out on Robben Island, etc., etc. And then after the ESCOM program ended in 2002, we had the Joule program that we all know about. I don't even have to mention it here. But then the SANEDI program started. SANEDI is the South African National Energy Development Institute. I joined them in 2008, and we had a program on cleaner mobility, looked at all the alternatives to petrol and diesel, and the best ones seem to be electric vehicles, and I think the rest of the world is also realizing now that that is the best way to go. There's lots of hype about hydrogen, and we can talk about that when we have the panel discussions. But in those days, also grid cars were formed. Winston is here, he'll talk a lot more about that. Uyulu is also here, I think. They also appeared on the scene then. And the Nissan Leaf and the BMW i3 was introduced to South Africa. So these vehicles were one of the first vehicles that we saw in South Africa. Now, currently I'm involved with a government motorized transport electric vehicle strategy. That's for the Western Cape government. So we are working there also to develop a strategy for the government motorized transport fleet, the provincial fleet of about 6,000 vehicles to be transitioned to electric vehicles. We did write the strategy. You can just Google it and find the strategy, download it. If you want to read it, you're welcome to do that. And where we are now is at the point where we need to create an electric vehicle ecosystem. Now, many people have talked about this, and I will just say a few words about it, but we can talk more about that during the sessions. Next slide, please. Can we move on? Yeah, thank you. So if you start talking about the ecosystem, the first thing you think about, where's the energy going to come from when you charge the batteries for electric vehicles? Now, it has been calculated that it's between 7 and 10% of the Eskom demand. So it's not a massive load on Eskom, but of course, in today's times where we have 21 gigawatts of supply capacity broken, it is a massive challenge. Then, of course, if you think about the infrastructure that needs to be put down, we can today drive from Pretoria to Cape Town, no problem, but not many cars together. If you have one car on the line, it's not a problem, you can charge. As a matter of fact, I think in this week, about, 25 cars from Gauteng driving down here, and about 25 from other places in South Africa. There's even a car that has been coming out of Mozambique. Yeah, so it's possible to drive these long distances with electric cars. And as I showed you, it's much cheaper to do that than using petrol or diesel. But of course, we need to take into consideration that people will be charging most of the time at home. So if everybody in the neighborhood has an electric vehicle added to their house, it's like adding a geyser to the home. The reticulation system in those neighborhoods are not suited for that. So everything will trip if everybody switches their cars on at the same time. We need to plan for these things. We need to create the environment that it's easy to do these type of things and safe and possible. And then we need to think about what happens to the old batteries. We can repurpose the batteries. We can recycle the batteries. We also need to think about manufacturing some of this ecosystem, some of these vehicles, some of these batteries in South Africa. There's no reason that we can't manufacture them locally. Of course, we need electric vehicles. Everything that has been on the market has been sold out in South Africa. And I would urge the motor manufacturers as well to bring these vehicles to South Africa. You've seen that the people in South Africa has got an appetite, contrary to popular belief, to buy these vehicles, even if they're in the higher bracket. Of course, for the province, the strategy that I'm working on in the Western Cape, we need affordable vehicles. I mean, the most popular vehicle there in the fleet is the typical Toyota Corolla or the Volkswagen Polo. They have about 2,500 of these vehicles. So we need these vehicles in high numbers because government should take the lead in transitioning their fleets to electric vehicles, and then the public will follow. Currently, it's the other way around. And that is the ecosystem. We can add more to that in the roundtable discussions. Next slide, please. So this is quoting Walt Disney, of all people. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. Next slide, please. Imagine yourself being a beggar. You're sitting next to the road, all right, and you are hungry. So a man comes to you and says, just stay strong. Everything will get better. And he's got a nice speech for you. And he leaves. You're still hungry. Somebody else comes. Doesn't say anything, but he sees you're hungry. Takes his sandwich that he's eating, giving you half of it, and he leaves you. Which one made the biggest difference in your life? The one that shared with you or the one that talked to you? And that's what I mean with not just talking. Let our talk today not just be talk, but plans for real implementation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Hussein, I don't know if you would like to take questions now or later.
Is there a question for Carl? Is there a question for Carl? I suppose most of that will be covered in the panel discussions. But essentially, what Carl is saying is that we have to flip the switch. Yeah, we got to go electric. I think there's no question that it's a cheaper form of transport. The numbers speak for themselves. Yeah, there is the question of the price of these things, but then there's technology that is moving so rapidly that before we know, these things might become much more affordable than what they maybe currently are at the moment. There's a question there in the back. Do you have a mic? There's a question. Okay.
Actually, the question is not asked for you. Yes, I just want to check that are we going to have access to the presentations from the speakers?
We can make that available, Carl. Not a problem. Will do. You got no IP on these things. Okay, our next speaker is Cello from VW. He doesn't have a presentation, but he is the sort of EV lead at Volkswagen. So let us just hear what Volkswagen wants to share with us. I know we've been in close contact with Martina Bina, the new MD VW. Inside this little book that I've put on your desks, there is the strategy that Volkswagen has in terms of EV, and there's some interesting stats inside there too. So Cello, thank you very much. I don't know why you don't want a presentation. You want to talk off the cuff. I've heard a question there that we want to share presentation. So before I get asked the question again, will we be sharing that with the audience?
Yeah, I can share it. Thank you. Just a point of correction, it's Lelo without the S. Yes, no problem. No problem. Good morning. To Mr. Thabo Shenxane, CEO of the AIDC, Denise van der Westhuizen, CEO of the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber, all attending dignitaries, industry leaders, and stakeholders. All protocol observed. My name is Lelo Mdladla, head of the EV program for Volkswagen Group South Africa. Today, I will be taking you through not just the view of my company, but a view which I believed is shared by the majority of us in this industry. To quote the famous Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I'm sure most of you can agree with me on that. We are living in an ever-evolving dichotomy of crisis and opportunity. But at the end of the day, I'm an eternal optimist, and I believe that opportunity will prevail. When we look at the transition to EVs, the first thing that comes to mind is the regulatory environment, because that is the catalyst which leads to the adoption of policy and the transition towards electric vehicles. And that's where I would like to start today. Recently as last week, the EU Parliament confirmed that as of 2035, there will be a ban on new petrol and diesel cars. What this essentially means is that from 2035 onwards, no new cars with combustion engines may be registered. Now, 2035 might seem like a short period of time, or a long period of time rather, but if you look at our industry and the fact that we have planning cycles of 7 years, it is a very, very short time indeed. Furthermore, the EU have further stated that by 2050, all vehicles on the road must be emission-free. And they've also said that as an interim measure, we must consider synthetic fuels like ethanol in order to achieve these targets. Now, VW exports the majority of its vehicles to EU markets. Up to 70% of our annual volume goes to Europe, with the lion's share going to the UK. What this means is that EV transitioning is essential to the survival of our business for 3 reasons. Number one, we need to ensure the future of vehicle manufacturing in this country. Number two, we need to maintain continuity of employment. As one of the biggest employees in the Eastern Cape, it is imperative that we are not only protecting jobs, but we're actually growing jobs. And number 3, we must maintain global competitiveness. As a part of a global network, we cannot take for granted that we will always have the volume that we have. We are also competing with other VW plant sites for a share of the volume. So we must be globally competitive. So with that, what have we been doing as a business thus far? Well, firstly, we have taken a decision to invest ahead of demand in terms of charging infrastructure. So one of our group brands, Audi, has partnered with a number of local service providers to roll out charging networks across the country to support the introduction of their products. This now includes the 200 kilowatt fast chargers within certain sites of the country. Also, we have recently concluded customer testing for the e-Golf in this country. And in East Africa, further afield, we have successfully rolled out in Rwanda an e-hailing program with a mobile services provider in that country, and that is growing exponentially year on year. Furthermore, from an introductory point of view, we have the ID4, which is our global EV product, coming for testing in South Africa, and the aim is to release it in the next coming years. In addition to all of these things, we are also working with our group partners in Germany to bring an EV charger product that will be the first of its kind in Africa. We displayed this product at the SA Auto Week last year. It is called the Autonomous Flexible Charger. And we believe that this innovation will further add to the support in investment behind charging infrastructure. And also, we continue to work extensively with our partners at NAMSA in developing policies for the government to promote the EV rollout. Now, one cannot talk about EVs without talking about renewable power. My colleague Carl previously talked about the same in his presentation. Renewable power is key to supporting the transition to EVs. In countries where EV transition has been successful, in Norway, for example, it has been supported by an aggressive transition towards renewable power. In Norway, for example, they have 79% penetration of EVs, and their renewable power is 98%, supported by hydropower. So that gives an indication that these two are not mutually exclusive, but they are quite symbiotic in nature. To power EVs with power from coal-fired power stations is counterproductive and does not have the positive carbon reduction impact. For example, within our own business at VW, we have taken steps to reduce the amount of power we have consumed from Eskom by installing embedded generation in our plant areas and also buying renewable power externally. All these efforts are to play our part in transitioning in all our internal power consumption to green energy. Furthermore, as an industry, we have collaborated with the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber in executing a renewable energy program where a group of companies all purchase renewable power at scale, leveraging of collective consumption. So, what does the auto industry need? Now, whilst these views are the views of VW, I believe that all of us here will probably be in agreement with such views. Firstly, we need policies that will enable OEMs and suppliers alike to invest in key industries to support EV adoption. If you look at other developing markets like India and China, they have always had policies that have allowed companies to invest ahead of demand. When you have policy certainty, companies can invest knowing that they can recoup their investments and understanding that the EV transition will happen in those countries. Furthermore, we need a greater share of renewable energy by Eskom and IPPs to support the charging of EV vehicles. Now, I know that right now the country is in a state of national disaster because of the challenges we have with the energy supply. However, I believe that there is a silver lining in this very, very dark cloud. Because what will happen is, because of the additional supply of power that will have to come onto the grid, that will have to be renewable power. And that presents itself with the opportunity for the country to diversify its sources from the current fossil fuel power to more renewable energy. Furthermore, we need a collaborative approach between spheres of government and industry to ensure that we're all aligned in our programs. I'm quite encouraged to see that organizations like the Presidential Climate Change Commission and other such organizations are working with us as auto industry to ensure that we are all pulling in the right direction and not working in silos. And furthermore, we need the continued support of the municipality, the Eastern Cape provincial government, and auto industry stakeholders like the AIDC in order to navigate the EV transition. In conclusion, the road to EVs is a journey that must be pursued with a cohesive approach by all OEMs and industry stakeholders to ensure two things. Number one, that we remain an exporter of choice into global markets. And number two, we become a growing destination for EV products. Yes, EV products are expensive, but if we manage to capacitate ourselves and ensure that we're able to produce them locally, we can actually develop a local market for ourselves and for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lelo. Got it right this time, eh? And okay, I don't suppose they're questions for VW. We'll take them as we do the panels. But yeah, the automotive industry, as you well know, produces cars and as well import cars. So it's important that the electric infrastructure in terms of charging stations get rolled out very quickly, because your entire business model of the automotive sector is based on exporting cars and importing cars. So it's important that we get the infrastructure right in the country so that we get the Audis and the BMWs and those cars that we don't manufacture in South Africa, but at the same time also have those that we can export to markets. You've just read in the news lately that the lawmakers have now banned all ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine cars in Europe. UK has had that on the cards for a long, long time. So it's no longer becoming a talk show. I think, as Carl said, it now is probably, and Lelo said it as well, 2035 is around the corner. And if we don't start something very, very soon, we're probably going to lose out in terms of the automotive sector. Our next speaker is from Eskom. Have I got the bio? From Ms. Aleta. She's 26 years with Eskom, senior engineer within Eskom. So Aleta, thank you very much. If you could address us.
Can I just get my laptop?
Let me get your laptop.
No, I need something in front of me. Okay. Good morning to all the delegates. And I would like to first start by thanking the AIDC for inviting us for this session. I think this is electric vehicles is something that we value a lot in Eskom, especially during this time of the energy transition. As already mentioned, I'm Aleta Mashao, and one of my current responsibilities in Eskom is the e-mobility initiative. Since the screens are far, I'm trying to get to open my slides on my screen here. So apologies if you can just give me a few minutes to set that up. Okay, what I would like to share with you today is the ESCOM fleet electrification pilot project that we are currently busy with. And then as well as the ESCOM's role in the e-mobility ecosystem. And lastly, the partnerships that we are looking at ESCOM to unlock the opportunities that we see in the e-mobility sector. Firstly, starting with our pilot project, just to give you a little background on why we are doing this in ESCOM. I think. Okay, sir. South Africa, as we all know, it's a signatory to the Paris Agreement, and that is actually a framework that is guiding all international efforts to limit greenhouse gas emissions and to meet all the associated challenges that are posed by climate change. And based on the research that has been done, published by the MDPI, the transport sector is estimated to account for 23% of global energy-related carbon emissions, and the bulk of those emissions, which is 70%, comes from road transport. So we see this sector then as an opportunity to make significant contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions based on all the commitments that have been made by the country and also in our organization ESCOM. So it's imperative that we all roll out low carbon technologies to minimize the impact of climate change, as well as ensure that there is climate resilience. So the transition to e-mobility is inevitable because there are decarbonization commitments worldwide, and then as well as new energy vehicle targets. I think Lelo from VW just mentioned now the law that was passed by the European Union Commission recently that from 2035, they are banning all fossil fuel vehicles. So the world is moving and we either move with them or we'll be left behind. Just to give you a background of the ESCOM Just Energy Transition, let me get away from the speaker. So our ESCOM JET office was established in 2020, and it has already made significant progress in terms of ensuring that we have a cleaner energy future in ESCOM. Our vision is to have net zero carbon emissions by 2050 with an increase in sustainable jobs. And one of the levers, okay, let me get a bit further. One of the levers that will steer us as an organization towards that target is actually to ensure that we don't have any emissions from our fleet of vehicles because it's quite a sizable fleet. And our ambition then regarding our fleet of vehicles is to ensure that they are all electrified by 2040. We gradually replace our vehicles every year, and then our strategy is to then, as part of that replacement, ensure that the vehicles that we are able to electrify them, we electrify them gradually until we meet our 2040 target. So ESCOM has thus made a commitment to be part of the anchor market for electric vehicles in the country. We realize that currently, when we are just looking at individual private purchases, the EV industry becomes like, electric vehicles become like a rich man's toy. But if we electrify our fleet and ensure that there is local market stimulation, then the OEMs can be able to actually drive the prices down. Just some salient facts about our fleet in distribution. As I mentioned, it's a sizable fleet. We have over 10,000 vehicles currently, and that is over 3/4 of ESCOM's total fleet. Before the lockdown in 2020, we did some calculations to see how much public charging stations, and then how can we plan to ensure that we have sufficient capacity in the electrical network at ESCOM level, at the municipal level, to ensure that we can be able to host the load from the public charging stations. The national government as well, firstly for policy investments in the infrastructure that is required for electric vehicles and the business community. As I mentioned, collaboration opportunities for research and pilot project, as well as shared investments for the infrastructure that is required. And in conclusion, I would just like to emphasize that ESCOM has taken to play a pivotal role in the e-mobility sector and requires participation from industry and government to unlock e-mobility opportunities through public-private partnerships and an enabling policy environment from the government side. From the distribution side, we are committed to enable the integration of the EV charging load onto the grid through network expansion and strengthening initiatives where required. And I think we can all agree that e-mobility is no longer a matter of if or when. It is already here, and we need to adapt to and develop the concrete plans that we have to be able to transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Aletta. I think we've sort of taken the first part of your morning and consumed that with Carol telling us how inexpensive it is to drive an electric car. So that's probably a huge plus. Volkswagen is an OEM. What are they doing on the African continent? Because you need to know that the African continent is probably going to be the biggest boom for mobility in terms of the world order. And then, of course, ESCOM also plays an important part. I mean, think about it. If you got to go fill your car, if you're still driving a diesel or like I am, Carl, sorry. So where's your nearest garage? So whilst, and Carl and Winston will share with you that the charging stations. So imagine all 5 million of us have electric cars. So it's important that ESCOM plays its part so that you have that convenience of charging, whether you charge at home. Of course, you're going to need to charge that car again, depending on how many kilometers you drive. So that's the morning part. I think that set us up for the panel discussions that we will go to. It is that time now that we're just going to have a leg break and a tea break. And I think at 10 o'clock, we will start the first panel discussion, which is policies and incentives. Followed by skills and technologies, and the last panel after lunch will be on infrastructure, charging stations, and everything else that goes with it. So thank you for indulging with us thus far. So have that break, and then we'll be back at 10. Thank you. So we'll get started with the first panel discussion. And that as the program which you have in front of you, which unfortunately we gave you late, but it was for good reason we gave it to you late, right? We didn't want you to see Carl talk about EV cars, being a 99-year-old man. We thought only young people drive these things, but clearly not. So we've got the first panel discussion, and that will be on policies and incentives. Kolani Mapalwa is a director on the AIDC Eastern Cape Board. He has gladly accepted to be the moderator for this particular panel. Happy to sort of have him here, particularly apart from his profile, which really talks across many sectors and many sort of disciplines. He's a government specialist. But in particular, I'm interested, he was heavily involved in the homologation process. And he does a lot around quality standards and those sort of things. So a gentleman that has got a wealth of experience in industry. So please welcome Mr. Kolani. Mr. Kolani will introduce his own panel members to you. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session. I would begin with the introduction of the panel, colleagues that will join shortly. And I want to begin with our first member, Miss Beth from NACAM. Please join us, Beth. So Beth is from NACAM. She's a project manager, and she has graduated from UCT First Class Honors in Economics, and she's got an undergrad in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics, and she has specialized in the automotive sector and brings a wealth of experience to the debate we're going to have today. And we welcome you, Beth. And the next person we're going to have is Mr. Mkhululi Mlota, is joining the panel. Mr. Mkhululi is a Chief Director of Automotives within the DTIC, and he has an extensive experience spanning 4 decades in the public sector, with a background in economics, as well as public policy and development management. And he has been involved, or was involved, during that time, what we call MIDP, Motor Industry Development Program, it's 1996, which now has evolved to become APDP. And he also serves as the chairperson of the MIDC, Motor Industrial Development Council, a forum that monitors implementation of the master plan, Automotive Master Plan 2035, and APDP programs. Thank you, Mr. Mlota, for joining us today. Next, we have Mr. Lungelo Tobongwana, who is from SABS. He heads the marketing, sales, and customer service. So, Mr. Lungelo is an experienced executive that has been involved with industries, power generation, automotive, chemicals, waste management, property management. He's got qualifications, MBA, MCOM, and he's a candidate currently for a doctorate. And his interest on business development and strategy. And we look forward to get the insights from him. And lastly, we have Mr. Tsetle from NAMSA. So Mr. Tsetle is the head of EV programs. And he's got experience that goes back to CSIR. He has been in the transformation and development space for over 2 decades, and has started award-winning NGO as a teenager. And we see him having roles in mining sector, pharmaceutical and media space. So those are some of his accomplishments. So welcome to the panel. We are talking policy and incentives. And this is a topic of interest. And I think I would just want to get the discussion looking at all that has been said today, touching from sales, seeing an uptake in the sales for automotive from 2017 to 2021. So we're seeing some sales. And then we also saw some direction towards investments in Africa, uptake of EVs, Kenya, Rwanda, EV investments. And then also we have highlighted some barriers that talk to low investment, no clarity on the policy, which is what we're going to unpack now. We have challenges on the charging points infrastructure. And we have seen also that Tesla is leading the global market in terms of EVs with around 23%. So given that background and all some of the other speakers have echoed, EU is our core market. I will start with you, Mr. Mlota. EU is our core market, I think, exports, and we have our fiscal incentives that we have currently. And also we want to look at what is it that we can achieve through this. So from a DTIC point of view, post the green paper that we had, the question would be, where are we on the policy? And what's the projection to get to a definite policy, sorry, as an enabler of the industry? Could you give us perhaps a snippet of where we are from that, and what is the projected timelines that we think we would achieve a definite policy outlook in terms of this?
Thank you. You'll pardon me, I had a bit of a flu, so my voice is not in its perfect form.
Yeah.
However, as you know, we published the Green Paper 2021, and the idea then was to have a definite policy within a few months' time. However, the kind of engagements that took place with the stakeholders kind of exposed all the complexities of developing public policy. And we are still on course to have something definite pretty soon. Unfortunately, I cannot give you an exact date at this stage, but pretty soon in the next few months, we should be able to get a cabinet endorsement. Now, as stakeholders will be interested to see what kind of direction I would take. We've learned from other jurisdictions a great deal in terms of the support that is required to support the industry or to support the transition to e-mobility. Ranging from demand side measures to supply side measures. And as stakeholders, what came true was that perhaps we should follow the lead of those jurisdictions in terms of consumer subsidies, amongst other things, and ensuring as well that we develop specific supportive instruments for our current markets, which would be the EU. So, you know, we have rules of origin and the stuff that would need to be taken into consideration, but also incentives for manufacturing. What is coming through, it's a direction that says ours should be led by manufacturing rather than on the demand side. And therefore the focus of the current processes is aimed at supporting manufacturing, primarily tweaking the current APP2 program because it's been so successful. But for investments in new technologies, it needs to be amended. So we're looking at such amendments that we can afford as a country, taking into account our size, as well as the distance from major markets. So the focus is on that side and less on the demand side in terms of stimulation. However, because government also is a significant customer for the auto industry, one of the things that we look at in partnership with the Department of Transport is to ensure that our fleet as government also does include EVs in its mix in the next few years. So there should be also something definitely true from that side. But also the Department of Transport, as part of the green transport strategy, is also looking at the deployment of charging infrastructure as well, not only for the government fleet, but for the public. So working with Sunral, they are busy exploring that. So from the DTIC's side, it will be the incentives from investment support to also ensuring that the APDP2 does specifically promote local production. And our interest also is on the various componentry, including the batteries that are going to be used, because we see an opportunity for beneficiation of minerals that we have in the country and also in the region. So working with the other African countries, we think we can develop a significant value chain in the automotive space, taking minerals from the SADC region, making those batteries here. And I think currently there are a few companies that are exploring manufacturing those batteries, hopefully around Gqeberha in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And I would want to move now to SABS. SABS, I think you play a pivotal role in enabling the economy to your standards. And I see the value that you have to bring in the sector through this EV transition. So from SABS point of view, how are you positioning testing, certification, and perhaps give us an outlook on investments aligned to testing for SABS in terms of batteries or components for this EV transition? And maybe the second part of it is there some linkage that SABS sees in terms of working with ARSO, who is African Standardization Organization, in terms of standards that will talk to the minerals? I think Mr. Mlota has touched on minerals in other areas, so that then we have accessibility to those standards as a sector. So I think those are the two questions I would like to pose. Thank you.
Thanks, Tolan. First of all, good morning to the fellow panelists here. When you said to me you're going to ask loaded questions, I did not anticipate that you'll start very early in the discussion. But having said that, what's critical for us is that in most cases you'll find that there's a policy, but the implementation of those policies becomes a challenge. But in this particular case, as an institution, we also contributed towards the green paper, but mainly around capacity capability building. How do we then ensure that when a policy is then published and gazetted and published, then we've got a capable state that can be able to deliver, of course, collaborating with other partners in the ecosystem. That's the first thing that we have done. The second one is that as an institution, we are a member of ARSO, and we participate in a number of technical committees for a number of reasons. One is to make sure that the standardization in terms of the standards, the quality, and the products that we all endeavor to provide. Secondly, is also to make sure that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is not a pie in the sky. It's something that is implementable. And it can only be implemented when we make sure that we enable trade amongst the countries within the SADC region and beyond. So that is the reason why we're participating there. The other one is that we do understand that the EV value chain is complex and complicated. So what we have done is to endeavor, firstly, to understand the ecosystem. Once we understand the ecosystem, we then look at the services that SABS that provides, both from testing, certification, and other auxiliary services from standards development. And then how do we then mirror those services towards the value chain so that we are not just another bottleneck or institution that does not add value. We add value in the areas where we know that our expertise and capacity is aligned in the value chain. So we do have a facility in East London. Of course, it has been mainly been focusing on the combustion engines from an emissions point of view. And that there will be a transition to the EVs, and that transition has also needs to be managed. Hence, we have collaborated with the likes of AIDC to then say, how can we then jointly repurpose the facility in East London so that it can be for the future whilst we are managing the transition. There are a number of projects that we have identified in that space, and they're working together, including with the likes of NAMSA and NANKEL, so that then we can understand the value system, because it does not only talk about the product that is complete, but there are various components that adds to the product that's being manufactured. So it's important for us that we don't only add value towards the end of the process, but we also take care of other items in the value chain. That is our involvement in this process. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think it's where you clap now. Thank you very much. I think we'll move on now to NACAM. So NACAM, you have a huge membership that supports this automotive sector with a lot of responsibility, and safety critical components are involved. So now we're moving to EV, 42% battery, reducing some of the components, impacting your sector. How do you see this ADP transition? I think as DDI has indicated, moving towards the alignment of the incentives that you would want as NACAM, that will address the shortfall because of these dynamics of the battery covering a huge level of magnitude on the car itself. So what type of incentives do you see would supplement and relieve the sector in terms of this?
Perfect. So I think there's a multi-pronged answer to this, and I'm working extensively with Kaluli and his team on figuring out what the right balance is for the component sector. For sure, I mean, the estimations between 30 to 40% of the value is going to be in your high voltage battery. So we currently have a consortium of members who are looking in local high voltage battery manufacturing. Obviously, if that ends up being successful, that goes a long way in reaching our 60% local content target, where we're currently sitting at about 39 or so percent. So that's a critical one, and that's where both ourselves as NACAM have been very supportive in drawing the connect between them and key stakeholders who could enable this, both locally with the DTIC Autodesk as well as the larger SADC region. So that's sort of prong number one, which is can we secure high voltage battery manufacturing? Prong number two is that I think when we talk about an EV transition, a lot of the time we kind of think of it as an immediate, we go from internal combustion straight to battery electric. And there is actually some technologies that kind of filter between there, particularly if you look at your plug-in hybrid. And that's where we have a lot of sort of, I guess, legacy sectors present in South Africa. So catalytic converters, we know, is one of our biggest sectors. And as NACAM, our sort of focus is, well, how can we support them to attract international trade, or sort of the last of the ICE trade to South Africa, so we can protect those industries for as long as possible. So as you know, Europe is closing down internal combustion facilities, can we onshore that production? And that's where we're working very closely with DTIC to make sure that we have the right incentives and policy in place to make South Africa as attractive as a sort of last mile destination as possible to protect those industries. And then the final part is, as much as we talk about sort of catalytic converters being our biggest export industry, a lot of the subsectors we have present here are what we sort of term technology agnostic. So they're present in both your internal combustion engine vehicle and your EV. A seat is a seat. Yes, certain properties of it change, but it's still very much present in that vehicle. And it's about how do we get the incentives right to ensure that we invest in a cost-effective way to support the EV transition. So I know a lot of what we've been, lobbying for as NACAM is to have, as Kaluli mentioned, some sort of incentive to support technology adoption. So we know that as we move towards EV, certain technologies will change, raw material composition changes, and a lot of that technology sits overseas, and we need to onshore that as well as skills. And so it's about having incentives to support that investment, particularly technologies for EVs. With that, we also think it's critical that we don't do extensive lowering of import duties on EV-specific components. The risk there being that we're going to erode an already relatively small tier 1 and tier 2 base in comparison to global industries. And that's the last thing we want. We strongly believe as NACAM that we have the capabilities here. A large contingency of our membership are multinationals, where the technology sits within the global company, maybe not necessarily South Africa, but we need to make South Africa as conducive an investment area as possible, so that our multinationals can make a really compelling argument to their headquarters for the onshoring of that technology. And we don't necessarily think that would be possible if we're lowering duty rebates or incentives on importing our components. So that's a critical one for us as the tariffs coming in, let's not lower those, and let's have incentives for technology investment.
Thank you. Beth. And I think it's time for NAMSA. So NAMSA, I see a lot of OEMs have committed investments. We've seen Ford investing multi-billions. We've seen VW globally investing 86 billion toward the target of transition. And as NAMSA, what does this indicate to you in terms of investment? Is it indicative of confidence into our markets that we are able to produce to the global standards? Is it showing indicative that there is stability in our markets in terms of our track history, and also coupled with the sales that we are seeing an incline and improvement in terms of sales on the EVs currently? So what is the take as NAMSA in terms of this investment towards EV manufacturing?
Good morning, and thank you for that question, and good morning, colleagues. I'm happy that you asked a loaded question, as they said earlier, because then I guess it gets us to reflect around what is the balancing act. I think a lot of times when we speak about EVs, the focus is on policy being driven by economic reasons, so economic policy, whether we continue to produce vehicles and because we produce those vehicles. The time is there though. Yeah, so let's be honest, there's other levers of policy, of public policy, that are not mentioned in how we are addressing this issue. So if, for instance, if we wanted to have electric vehicles on the road for health reasons, reduce NOx out of the atmosphere, create a vehicle that's producing less emissions, then the discussion is different, then the policy considerations are different. Health would be an issue. If it's a climate change discussion, then we're discussing how are we generally working on just transition and EVs, their role in that movement towards just transition. And then there's an element there that brings out other considerations around how then do we stimulate demand for these vehicles because they are more healthier, environmentally healthier, and we deliberately working towards creating a zero emissions environment in the country. And it's a demand discussion that then would come out of that dialogue. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that government is also not monolithic. It's not just DTI that's at play. We hear because AIDC is a provincial government role player, and they have a role to play in the transition itself. And that particular role might not necessarily be one is a supply side role. It could also be a demand side role. We have municipalities, and municipalities have got a role to play. And I'll give an example of something that does not necessarily exist. On the assumption that Gqeberha wants to be and an example, by the way, and me thinking out loud, and I'll revert back to your question. Gqeberha wants to be a destination for imports of NEVs. And Gqeberha would deliberately do a program of government to make sure that we're able to receive imports, clear them, which is a capacity we don't have. We only receive vehicles from Durban currently. And you put your set of incentives around making sure that there is traffic for new vehicles imported and received from a new town. That is a possible municipal-based program to have around EVs. And it would be on the demand side because it will then encourage the arrival of NEVs into the country. And that particular dialogue is quite different, say, from the one we're having today, where we're really looking at EVs from, can we continue to produce this using existing mechanisms such as AIS, and what can we leverage from this particular transaction? And perhaps then we'll have that import duty focus debate and look into what does it mean in the short term to long term when industry says that perhaps we reduce import duty for purposes of improving rules of origin. And even within that, it's a loaded discussion. So to your point, investments are happening and government has got a nice tool in the AIS to support investment in local manufacturing. And that tool seems to be a primary tool that we will focus on from both the GTIC point of view and us, because it exists within APDP, for us to incentivize the production of NEVs. But we will have to unpack what that looks like from a production point of view. But from a demand side, I think there's a lot of levers that are not in discussion that exist at both municipal and provincial, and some of them in other government departments. And so investment as currently structured and as currently supported by the DTIC, the levers there are quite strong, and we should be able to use those to move into EV manufacturing.
Thank you very much, sir. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll look at the program director when he indicates. Now, there are a lot of small upcoming businesses, which is part of the transformation, and this whole industry of EVs. How do you see them becoming part of this value chain? Because it's a very strict sector with quite regulation, the high level regulations. So how do you see NACAM opening and sort of releasing and lowering the barriers to trade for them to get access into?
For sure, and I think that's a question we ponder a lot as NACAM, and there's a couple of, I suppose our role is to getting them in, joining up the contacts, and that's, I mean, as an association, that's our main purpose, is connecting the dots and supporting where possible. But there are, I think, two really critical levers, which for sure NACAM can't take credit for per se, but I think are going to be critical in that. The first of which I think is the AITF, so the Automotive Industry Transformation Fund. That really is the first time we almost have a mandated requirement to be using 51% or more Black-owned businesses that tier 1, tier 2, and tier 1 lower tiers base, and they have to do that as part of a market access proportion in return for the multinationals. So currently it's your OEMs, but hopefully soon we'll have at least another 35 tier 1 multinationals plus more in the future, who are all going to suddenly be requiring market access, so business opportunities to component manufacturers that are 51% or more Black-owned. Ideally, what we'd hope is once the policy is finalized and there's a lot of clarity in it, and we see the move towards EVs, that will automatically pull through the tier 2 base, that are the transformed tier 2 base in their market access opportunities. So there'll be a lot of new procurement coming through those programs, and so hopefully AITF will be able to funnel a lot of that towards your transformed tiered base. I think another lever which both my colleagues on the right are involved in is ASCII, which has a couple of really critical programs, one being a Black Supply Development Program and World Class Manufacturer Program. And both of those are, I think the reality is you can't entirely lower the barriers to trade in this sector. You can't suddenly remove quality requirements. We're not producing vehicles that are solely, for a local market. We have standards that we have to adhere to. We can't just, remove those for the sake of creating a wider tier 2 transformed base. That's not a viable option. So what we have to do is ensure that the tier 2 base meets those requirements. And that's where programs like ASCII become really critical in terms of supporting to get the right standards in place, B, connecting the dots. I think often also in this industry, it can be quite closed if you're not a big multinational that has the contacts already. And so that's where we as NACAM or ASCII or even NAMSA has their part to play in connecting those dots and getting the transformed companies into the supply chain. And I think we've had success. I'm not going to sit here and claim that it's been fast and it's been as quick as I think anyone would have hoped it to be. But equally, it takes time. We heard earlier how long a production cycle takes and planning takes in this industry. You can't, unfortunately, decide you want to be a component manufacturer today and be supplying tomorrow. It is a long process. But I do believe that we're on the right strides. And hopefully, once the policy comes through, once AITF is working, it's going to be a lovely moment of everything coming together. And maybe it might be utopian. But I really do believe that I think it's going to push the lever forward a lot in terms of transforming our tier 2 base and getting it to be a much more established base. Like you see, I mean, if you look at your foreign auto sectors, generally what you see is a very famous diagram which shows in South Africa, essentially, if you think of a triangle, we're inverted. So the OEMs are the major value addition creators, and per tier level, where overseas it's the other way around, and it's your tiered base that has really created significant value involved in the R&D process. So ultimately, we need to achieve that kind of inversion of the triangle to some extent.
Okay.
Sector.
Thank you. And I think now Lungelo, just also on that same vein of SABS standardization, there's another component that is very important, which is NRCS regulations. And how closely have you started engaging with NRCS in terms of those standards that will become regulations at some point, in terms of enabling that environment, in terms of moving a standard to be, becoming a compulsory specification, so that the regulatory work gets done, and so that we don't have them lagging, but we have them leading as a regulator. So what is the status in terms of that? Has there been any discussion with NRCS, and are you on par in terms of the progress in comparison, obviously, to other markets, Canada, Japan, China, India, and so forth, in terms of regulations from the standardization side of things?
Thanks, Tolan. While SABS and NRCS are sisters, I think it's important to understand that these two institutions have two different but complementary mandates. So as a result, SABS cannot encroach on NRCS and vice versa. But in so doing, we need to be aligned in terms of our strategic objectives, and where we are joined in the hip, then we agree on the programs that we then put together to realize those objectives. The first one is that we do meet with NRCS on a quarterly basis to discuss both operational and strategic related initiatives. And the EV, as a matter of fact, is one of the objectives that SABS has put in, and then we are discussing that. But the regulator standards by nature are voluntary. It becomes part of the regulation if the regulator has reference to that standard, and then it becomes compulsory. So regulators and any other interested parties do form part of the teams that develop these standards. So as an institution, SABS administers the process. However, the technical committees are comprised of a number of representatives, and regulators are one of them. So that is where the regulator needs to then kind of highlight the expectations in terms of the technical standards that need to be in place. And then where it's a regulated product, they then make reference of those standards in their regulations, which is the compulsory, what you normally call it, VC. How they manage that, how they do market surveillance in terms of imports and exports and the likes, it's something that is in the purview of the regulator, but working in conjunction with SABS. But what we normally do, because we know that as SABS, we've got a certification scheme that by nature ensures that there's ongoing quality assurance that a holder of that certificate has. We then engage with NRCS to then say, how can we then ensure that the institutions leverage in terms of the levies that are charged, and also in terms of the fees that are charged for the mark scheme. It's something that we've been trying to iron it out, but as you will know that when you have two bulls, one needs to pull the other direction. But I think it's something that with the respective sector desk at GIC, you always try to find a common ground that can benefit industry. But I think, Kolani, just to close it off there, for me, what's critical is the coordination of these efforts. It's all good that a number of parties are running this, but the coordination of these efforts, it's something that I think certainly needs to be improved. But once again, also duplication of efforts. We know that the fiscus is very much limited. We should not be duplicating these efforts, but rather complement where there are gaps, and then so that we can be able to make sure that we've got a capacitated state that can be able to realize these NAV objectives. Thanks.
Thank you. Kulul, I think one of the things that's come out of the collaboration, are you feeling confident that so far as a department in terms of awareness and also the stakeholder engagement is sufficient with the industry in terms of how you have engaged with them to this point? And do you believe once the policy is out, the uptake of EVs and also the development of the sector itself on the EV will see an improvement?
In terms of engagement with the stakeholders, I think we've done enough to get to the stage where we are. However, it can always be improved going forward. And why am I saying so is because I can understand the anxiety that's been out there since we published the green paper and accepted inputs. So that there's room for improvement. But I think, as I say, in the next couple of months at most, we should be having a clearer direction from government on where we're going with the EVs. And I think that will lay a firm basis for decisions, appropriate decisions in terms of investing and also improving trade on EVs. And I expect that within a couple of years, we should see some serious movement in that regard. You must remember also that currently there are some, especially your component manufacturers, that are already engaged in one form or another in the production of components that can be utilized by EVs. I'm talking about specific components for EVs different from the current kind of product mix. So it should also then provide certainty so that such decisions can be made. And also in terms of coordination, remember we have an executive oversight committee that oversees the implementation of the master plan. And one of the pillars there or subcommittees is looking at technology. And under that kind of umbrella body, there should be ongoing engagements, and that EOC is chaired by the minister himself. So there are platforms for improved coordination, and they can only get better going forward with a policy certainty that will be provided.
Yeah.
And I confidently say within a few months, because we've already engaged the cabinet committees on what we should be coming out as EV support. We went through the DG's cluster in December already. So we've got a green light. Now what is left is for us to finalize a few details with the National Treasury, and we're good to go to cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mulot. And then lastly, NAMSA, in terms of consumer awareness lobbying and the targets you project, from your current insights that you have, what do you foresee in the next 3 years in terms of this uptake of EV? I know currently, I think going together with what Mr. Mlota is working on incentives, there's an issue of tax, which is very high when you import the vehicle. And I think that is another issue that would be one of the critical aspects to take care of as part of incentivizing that so that you get to improve accessibility of EVs. But what do you see from your current insights?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, I'm actually trying to figure out how to approach the answer, but from the first speaker, I think we know for a fact that for every vehicle that we've been able to produce or import in the market, there's been a buyer. So it's early adoption. So the environment that we have currently in the country suggests that early adopters are eager to get into the. We've already discussed the whole idea that if you drive an EV, because of the cost of driving one versus an ICE engine, your return on investment, you can actually recoup the extra tax that makes the vehicle at least to be outpriced in the current market. So in terms of consumer behavior and early adoption, we know that we've got a consumer base that would adopt the technology if the supply is enough. Here's where the challenge with your question comes from someone that sits where I said, NAMSA represents two separate cohorts of members, those that are manufacturing locally. And those that manufacture locally have are waiting on a program that will support their investment for EVs, introduce new technologies, expand the supply chain, and allow new suppliers to come into the country. And within those that manufacture vehicles, then the dynamic is how do they compare to other markets where the same vehicle is produced? So if, for instance, some of the vehicles that we produce in Gqeberha, like the Polo, are not only produced here, but they are produced in other markets elsewhere in the world. And so what are the competing incentives for production, say in the United States versus in locally for the same vehicle? And there, then the dynamic is the global production of batteries, for instance, of cell manufacturing globally. It's an environment where even Europe, to an extent, is struggling. And you've seen it move towards China and the United States after announcing the Inflation Reduction Act last year. We've seen a lot of cell manufacturing also move towards the United States. Now that's a space that we also want to leverage the existence of minerals and compete in for cell manufacturing, and to bring cell manufacturing into South Africa and create an expanded supply. But then the dynamics of comparing cell manufacturing in those markets versus us becomes a challenge. And within that same space, we also have those trade policies that we're not discussing today, but that are influencing that space. Things like rules of origin, how much content in a vehicle is South African, so that we can export it on free trade to these markets where we're selling vehicles. Okay, I think that one thing that we celebrate with such engagements is, again, reflecting on the idea that government is not monolithic. It's not just Department of Trade and Industry to support this evolution. It's actually a broader discussion we could have. It exists at municipal level, it exists at provincial level, and it exists within various departments, even at national level. I like the fact that the custodian of public transport is the Department of Transport, and within that particular space, with road management as well, there's possibilities to support that evolution into NEVs, and that we as an industry, we are here effectively to provide the products that are going to make everything work. But in these engagements, I think that we should almost do what the famous song of the early 90s said, make cycle bigger, and and all hold hands as we evolve towards this new future, which is inevitable and it's upon us. And like you said, it's no longer happening, it's here. And so therefore, and that's why we need to celebrate the AIDCs for having such roundtables, because they make these conversations front and center. And this is the journey we are on.
Okay, thank you. AIDC. I wasn't paid. Mr. Mlota, we save the best for last. Your thoughts, your views?
Thank you. Yes, there is a lot that is currently being done to support the transition, and there's still more that can still be done. And also through the earlier presentation, I think Karel indicated that they've been working with one province to develop their own provincial strategy on EVs. I think the AIDC in the Eastern Cape is well positioned to also assist in the development of a provincial EV strategy. Something that can talk to the public transport fleet in the province. Remember, it's not only new vehicles that will be EVs. Conversions also do take place, especially public transport, your buses and stuff, but also your light vehicles. So there is a role, as Sasha was saying, Peter, for the province and for the different cities. From a national point of view, as the DTI, we think that in the next few weeks or months, we should be having public kind of pronouncements on how we're going to support EVs, but that will not be the last. As I indicated earlier, there is a role for the Department of Transport and National Treasury to get involved, as we also seek to transform our fleet to EVs in the various spheres in government. So also skills are going to become an important focus area as well, because we need specific skills to support the EVs that will be there. We've seen a nice growth. I think for the first time last year, we've sold more than 500 pure EVs in the market, and a lot more hybrids. And also on the production side, at least 2 OEMs are producing hybrids in the country. So we are seeing some signs of the transition, but we can only expect it to grow from here.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you, sir. So in closing, I think what is coming out is that there is misguided perception that there is no work that is happening. There is work that is happening, and there are instruments that DTIC will develop to support the industry. And also, I think, as you say, that when we look at the EV strategy nationally, not only provincially, we should be more inclusive of all the types of categories of vehicles. Conversions, as you mentioned, is one of them, and so forth and so forth. And I think then that gives us a good view to say that the work continues. The work continues, and I think there's a quote that says 1% genius and 99% perspiration by that guy Thomas Edison. And I think this is what it says, that it's befitting in the sense that our work in the sector, from government to the industry, all the stakeholders, that the work continues. We continue to work and continue to work and continue to work. So we will perspire as we work towards the objectives and the targets that have been set in this transition to the end goal. So I think that is how I would want to end it. And I would like to say thank you very much for making time and being part of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You may stay seated. You got questions. Don't you just run away. Are there any questions for this panel? Surely there must be plenty.
Hi, my question is to Mkhululi. My name is Gqeberha from Rubicon. As far as the policy around electric vehicles and e-mobility is concerned, I know that there are a set deliverables on that, but what are the rough timelines that are in play at the moment? Because that seems to be an unknown factor.
Thank you, Greg.
It's from Khululi.
I suppose you're talking about timelines to have this policy publicly announced. An indication is that it should be before April, before the end of April. We should have something in place. That's the timeline we're working towards.
Thank you, Mkhululi. Yeah.
It's a projection, Greg. It's a projection.
It is April 2023, please.
Thanks, Program Director. For me, really, is I've been listening to some of the speakers before this panel discussion and the contribution that panelists have made. I hear there's very little that is being said insofar as the implications of this transition. insofar as a number of things. One wonders, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Association of Municipalities, and so one wonders as to what's the time it takes to charge a vehicle, and if it's more than the time it takes to fill up the tank, what are the urban design implications? What are the net per capita traveler's expense if it were to take an hour? Imagining that you're arriving at a charging station during a stage 6 load shedding. And what are the implications in terms of that? Because I would imagine if you are to sit for 4 hours somewhere in between Bloemfontein and Gauteng, you may as well consider to book accommodation. So that it really imposes a net per capita traveler's expense in terms of that. Because I see that we almost there, albeit at a very small margin, and the bulk of what would happen as the foreseen future will happen most likely at the time we may not have load shedding. What are the implications now? So the filling stations that we have, can we immediately convert them into filling stations or charging stations that have that would have sufficient space if cars would take too long to charge? So what are the implications?
May I take you off the hook on that question?
Okay.
Because I have a panel that will talk to that later.
I was thinking we're saying that I'm the only one representing the product from the panel be indirectly directed to me, but I'm happy you're saving me then.
Yeah, we've got the economic infrastructure panel, and I think a lot will be said there in terms of charging stations, how quick they charge, and so forth. So let me leave that so that panel tells you a lot more of the state of infrastructure in the country.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, but from the presentation that we had from ESCOM, and what they did is that they had that Belgian matrix on the right of their presentation that shows off-peak versus peak recharging. At off-peak rates, these vehicles would make public transport a lot more affordable. And so the question is the idea of if ESCOM is available for 2 hours between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. for you to recharge your vehicle, and we're talking about a taxi, and that takes, or a bus, and that bus then, what would be a range for that bus? Can that taxi go on the whole day without a need to recharge? And currently the range it allows for that. A fully charged vehicle can give you quite a lot of distance, especially because for a taxi it will even work better because it's a stop and go. And so the amount of energy you'll be able to preserve in your battery would mean that the cost to the consumer is reduced already from just your running expenses on a vehicle being as low as it is. So in terms of aspects to cost to consumer, the vehicles themselves represents a cost reduction, and they represent almost a counter-inflationary adjustment for households. In that one aspect, that's why we know that the uptake has been so high, even at the current rates that these vehicles are available at in the market, because you can actually recoup your losses. But if you're in a terms of, let's assume there's a taxi that missed out on an off-peak recharging period, and now they need to stop for 4 hours during a day to get it recharged, as you're putting it. Obviously, then, but they still recharge at off-peak rate. It will still almost have a similar impact, but your cost, your opportunity cost would be the amount of business they would have done in those 4 hours. So it therefore means that then the prudence is the question. A public transport operator should choose to recharge at peak rates at chosen times when there's no opportunity to do business. and it's not an economic challenge in that one sense. It's an entrepreneurial one, but it's one that can be overcome.
Okay, thank you, Program Director. For me, look, I like what I hear, especially, from all the panelists, especially what was being said by SAPS around looking at the value chains. But then I was wondering, was saying that they are looking at those value chains from the testing point of view. Now I'm just thinking now from the positioning point of view, whether there's someone who's looking at those value chains of this sector to lift up those segments of the value chain that we see as a country having more competitive advantage on, so that we can, even in incentivizing this, we can strategically, systematically incentivize those areas that we know that we have competitive advantage on, and in trying to embed this sector into the country before we lose this window of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conlon. Sam?
No,
Value chain?
Not for me.
It's actually his.
Mr. Mlota?
I thought Beth would jump at this one because they've done a study recently trying to identify specific componentry that as a country we can target for localization, which means targeted investment support as well. So there are a few ideas coming through in terms of targeting specific componentry. And we see a situation where there's going to be ongoing kind of engagement with the various producers of such componentry. Some we don't have in the country, but we do have the capacity to localize quite a number of those specific components. So yes, through the DTIC and the various fora that we sit on, be it the master plan or MIDC, we will be targeting those components for localization, because for us, yes, there's the environmental question for transitioning, but for us is also protecting what we already have as an automotive manufacturing sector and growing it from there. Yes, there will be losers along the way unless they produce different kind of products as we transition from ICE, but we see opportunities for the creation of industries or sectors as well.
Yeah, maybe if I just add, considering Nkululi called me out, I'll add on to that one. So absolutely, I completely agree. So it's been a study that's been undertaken, NARCAN project manager with the support of ASCII in the detail particularly. I think the real advantage we have is we have a lot of raw materials locally. And the key for us is, can we beneficiate them locally? And that really will unlock a lot of value addition within the full value chain, straight from raw material beneficiation all the way up. So, I wrote down before I came on here, there's sort of 3 identified categories of componentry that we're looking at. At the moment, it's electronic motors and transmission, power electronics, and high voltage electrical distribution. At current stages, the research has more or less just been finalized and approved, and now we need to go into the stage of really the second phase of understanding, well, how we've identified where the opportunity is, how do you unlock it? So, I can already say that as NARCAN, we're engaging a local copper mine to see if we can start getting local auto grade of copper, because as it stands, we don't have that. And it's starting at sort of those lower building blocks of your raw materials, getting local raw materials and then building it up from there. And I think we can unlock significant value where, as Nkululi said, certainly there are going to be losers in the NEV transition. There's no way that you're not going to have that. But can we make sure that for the losers we have a lot more winners, and as an industry we're moving towards a greater contribution to the GDP, greater contribution to employment, and that would ultimately be our goal. And I think as a component space, we have a big role to play there, being the large employer in terms of the auto industry. So I hope that clarifies a bit for you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I think mine is for Mr. Mlota. I do want to find out, do we have any impediments that stand in the way to us developing provincial policy to enable us movement in this space? Because I know that the Western Cape is a few steps ahead in terms of e-mobility. So I'm just wondering whether there is opportunity for the Eastern Cape based on our risk to, our reliance rather to auto sector in terms of our economy. So I think that would be, just to find out if we have room to move. Maybe we could move quicker than April. I don't know. Thank you.
I think the AIDC can say more on that topic, but there is room for the province to create its own policy. And of course, it will have to take into account what the national policy is, and but nothing stopping the province developing its own kind of policy, like the Western Cape has done already. So let me leave it to the AIDC perhaps to expand on that.
AIDC?
Oh, okay. I was actually going to make a comment. I didn't know I was answering questions too. Yes, look, the work we are doing now, working with the private sector in the main, is also trying to understand where the opportunities are so that we can advise on structuring whatever type of incentive regime we could structure for the province. So the interest I have with what Beth is saying is the studies you're doing, which now begins to tease out the value chain and where the opportunities are, is really going to assist the HOD in where's Mr. Wakaba? He's here, the ECDC, as we begin to navigate an incentive regime we could have in the province to activate those opportunities within the province. So I would like you to consider, Beth, that when that study is complete with its recommendations, we host you for a session of this nature so that the existing suppliers, tier 2, tier 3, can begin to see where the opportunities are. 1. 2, that study should help us what type of sub-instruments in a loan or in an equity transaction, what form, structure, and shape it should look like. So that all of this, what we're trying to do must be practical, as opposed to just talking and talking and talking. The last comment is, I like the date of April, Greg. At least there's a date now. No pressure, I'm cool. But there's a date now. The date gives some kind of certainty on the kinds of things we need to provide comfort on to our province and investors alike. So we'll help where we can, if we need assistance, but we need to get to a point where we close that gap. And that is what then the whole country can move forward with all the nice things we would like to do. Thank you very much.
Mike's gone. In terms of time, I'm going to take 2 more questions.
Thank you. My name is Asan Mzinyati. I'm from AIDC Gauteng, heading business development. I just want to pose a question to Mr. Mkhululi from DTIC. I'm sure you have noticed, more especially in the media, there's been quite a lot of adverts about institutions conducting their own studies into the electric vehicles. I know IDC as well has gone out looking for consultants to conduct the study. I know in the previous years, AMSA and DTIC have done a study onto the electric vehicles. Now, it seems as if we're repeating ourselves in the process. Is there a way that there could be a standardized terms of reference as to what entails these studies that are going to happen? Because also from our side, we're engaging in doing our own study, but are we not repeating the same stuff that has been done in the past, and how can one also have access to what has already been there, has been studied, and the results. Because at the end of the day, we're using public funds, and what are people doing the same thing, we're going around in circles. Is there a way that can be coordinated from your department and give clear terms of references to what is being investigated, what are the end results for these studies, so that we don't repeat the same thing? Thank you.
Thank you. We are in an environment where we can't really direct what any other institution does per se. However, I think there is room for improved collaboration to the extent that there be access to whatever studies that have been done, such that it can be taken into consideration, and also in drafting a terms of reference for any other study, it can be informed by what is already available. I think there is room for such, and one would hope that this kind of master plan committee, as I said, chaired by the minister, gets out there and be accessible, because some of the studies that we've done in the past 2 years, be it through ASCII, NACAM, and TIPS, which we use, that should be easily available. But I guess it's a matter of making it known out there. I know also the Gauteng province itself has been doing some study in this space as well recently, but they made contact and we are sharing notes. So there is that opportunity for improvements. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mkululi. Gone. Oh.
Just a small comment on ISO 14001 waste. When those studies are conducted, please include how you're going to recycle those batteries and those motors. With regards to policy, Umpatuam has already alluded to that. We are also busy with the broadband rollout and the installation of fiber, which is the policy issue on its own. So we are not, we can carry that one through. Also, I don't know the relationship between lightning and charging electric vehicles. If there is a relationship there, please include it as well. Those are just my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. I think those are more comments than anything. And clearly, recycling of batteries is part and parcel of the entire process the world over. And I'm sure that's going to be considered. So I just want to say to the people online, we want you to get questions as well. So your time's up for this panel. So if you want to put questions for the next panel, we'd welcome them. Panel members, my moderator, Mr. Tolani, thank you very much. Sabs, Lungelo, Beth, thank you very much. Mr. Mlota, thank you for coming. I see you're still feeling a little under the weather. And Tsetse, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you.
And all that work happens in Gqeberha. Towns, even within SADC, that are driving innovation, that are growing for purposes of supplying the auto industry from a different economy altogether, and those are incentivized. So don't look at industrial development as a function of a given town because they've got a presence of a manufacturing capacity. Look at industrial development as building manufacturing capacity with a set market that you're going to sell your products to, and then looking and work in reverse. So you'll find that all the existing incentives at DTIC, whether it's the production incentive, whether it's the same AIS that we mentioned, are available for you to do that local innovation and manufacturing. The location of your client should not be a factor at all. Thank you.
Before I introduce the next topic, which is engineering skills and technologies, may I just take this opportunity to share with you the apologies from our Premier. You all know it's SOPA, State of the Province address, so the Premier is busy with that process. And our MEC Mvoko also needs to sort of, and he's doing the cabinet meeting as well. So sincere apologies from our leadership of the province. Okay. Another. A different question.
Spreading the weight around. Yeah.
That's the one I just read. Okay. So our next panel, as I shared with you, is engineering skills and technologies. Ricardo Temes is the moderator of this panel. Ricardo is an esteemed colleague at the AIDC. I think he will introduce himself.
I've got a mic. Thanks, Hussein. I just need to manage the speaker behind me. So this morning, ladies and gentlemen, still morning. This morning, what we're going to do is discuss the issue of skills and skills development in our province and in our country. We've invited Edom Foley to join us, and thank you for being here. Edom is from Hilo, the Hilo program at the university locally. And then we also have Martin Sane with us this morning. And then on my left-hand side, on your far left-hand side as well, we've got Russell Besaiden, who is the CEO of Industrial. So we do have the biographies. If you can flight them, please. The audio people. I'll start with Edom Foley. I have it in front of me. So Edom currently serves as the program manager for the National Hilo E-Mobility Program, a multi-stakeholder collaborative program initiated by the Technology Innovation Agency, focused on enabling, facilitating, and mobilizing electric mobility in South Africa. Edom completed her MBA at the Nelson Mandela University's Business School, where she developed an interest in entrepreneurship and management of technology. She also holds a postgraduate diploma in management marketing and a Bachelor of Social Science degree from the University of Cape Town. Edom has over 15 years of experience in various business development roles within the private sector and NGOs. In her spare time, Edom enjoys participating in social impact initiatives involving women and youth. And let me say that we work with Edom and Hilo on a full-time basis at the university, and quite capable and very pleasant to work with, and drives the projects that she's involved with. She really drives them, and I think our province is richer for having Edom work in our province and at the university. Thank you for coming, ma'am.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Then Mr. Russell Besaiden, he joined First National Battery in 1992. He spent his first 20 years in human resource roles, culminating in the HR director's role in 2001. He spent a year as commercial director before being promoted to managing director in December 2013, and then the CEO in February 2019. With a career spanning over 30 years in battery manufacturing, and now as CEO of the largest battery manufacturing operation in South Africa, Russell has acquired a great deal of knowledge in this field. Welcome, sir. And then moving over to Mr. Martin Sane, Managing Director of Explayo South Africa. It's quite a long CV, yeah? Martin is currently the MD of Explayo South Africa. Explayo is a trusted partner for end-to-end integrated engineering, quality services, and management consulting, specializing in digital transformation. Explayo helps businesses harness unrelenting technological change to successfully deliver innovations that will help gain a competitive advantage and improve the everyday lives of people around the globe. Recently, Martin has been involved as a non-executive board member with Mellow Cabs vans in Stellenbosch that have designed and manufactured compact light EVs for last mile delivery in retail. Until December 2020, Martin was cluster executive manager and executive director at the South African Council for Scientific and Industrial Research for the manufacturing cluster focusing on material science, manufacturing and the fourth industrial revolution. As part of this role, Martin was ambassador for the World Manufacturing Foundation, speaking on the future of manufacturing and the fourth industrial revolution at various national and international events. Martin has also been a board member of the Mandela Bay Composites Cluster from 2017 to 2020. He has extensive experience in industrial engineering background, which includes telecoms, electrical engineering, IT, and energy industries, where he has held various leadership roles during his career. With over 33 years of engineering and management experience, Martin has gained particular experience and skills in executive management, engineering, R&D, project management, business development, sales, and sales management. And I can go on. Yes, I was going to say. So what we're going to do this morning is really, hear from these ladies and gents with regards to skills and the importance of skills development, looking at electric vehicles moving forward. But before I hand over to them and start asking them some questions that we can gain insightful answers on, the Institute of Motor Industry in the UK, they did a little study, they did a survey, and they determined that in the United Kingdom, now the United Kingdom has a population pretty similar to the size of South Africa. And we just heard about policy and incentives, and countries like the UK, the US, China, they are pretty much advanced when it comes to policy in the space of electric vehicles. And what resulted from that policy certainty is that the market responded. There's a huge demand for electric vehicles. Now, with that demand for electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure comes the need to service these vehicles and sell them and everything that goes on in and around that sector. And the Institute of Motor Industry UK has determined that they would require 90,000 new skills from an engineering perspective, technicians, mechanics, etc., etc. Everybody in that value chain, they need 90,000 more skills in that space. So when we look at the EV market, we can see that there's a silver lining, and I say that because as South Africans with a high unemployment rate where we need to create jobs, this is a good opportunity. And taking from the presentation that Carl shared with us this morning, there's a whole EV ecosystem. So if you look at the EV ecosystem, there'll be quite a lot of skills that will be needed. So on that introduction, Eden, from your side, I would like to give you the opportunity to just introduce Uhilo and what it is you do and the importance of skills in that space that you operate in, and what it is that we need to do going forward to make sure that the province in South Africa keeps producing the skills where you are.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. The Uhilo e-mobility program, as Ricardo highlighted eloquently in my introduction, is we are really focused on ensuring that all the initiatives that we undertake is equipping South Africa for the adoption of electric vehicles. And we do that through engaging with multiple stakeholders, national government departments, local government departments, provincial government departments, and their agencies, the private sector. We engage a lot with associations such as NARCAM and also the Retail Motor Industry Association as well. So we really try and use our program as a platform to help with skills development, which is very important, and skills development not only amongst the engineers and amongst the technicians and amongst the scientists. Skills development is also important amongst key decision makers. We are engaging in a lot of initiatives now in capacity development with local government departments, national government departments, and provincial government departments as well. And we're hoping that we can also do that within the Eastern Cape, specifically Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality, so that they can also be on par with the capacity development initiatives that we've held with City of Tshwane, City of Cape Town, City of Johannesburg, and eThekwini Municipality. And then we really we have started an e-mobility project for incubation of youth in this province, and also for skills development for youth in this project, because they are the future of this province, and they're the future of the country as well. And we are an automotive hub, so it's critical that we capacitate our youth for skills for the future. And this is now the window of opportunity within the next couple of years. As we heard from the previous speakers, that they're banning they're banning ICE vehicles by 2035. By 2050, in our key export destinations, only zero-emission vehicles will be allowed. So it's critical that we start now, not just at TVET level or university level. We need to start with skills development in STEM in high school. We need to capacitate our TVET lecturers, capacitate our university lecturers as well, and capacitate our teachers so that they can impart this knowledge eloquently to our youth. Thank you.
Thanks, Edom. Martin, over to you. If you can share with us the player group, what it is you do and skills and the importance of skills at Explayo.
Okay. So I'll also take a little bit of a step towards my previous role at CSR, because the two are quite well linked, and linked by the topic of digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution. People, it's a term that's thrown around quite loosely, but what is really behind it? And as in all of these discussions today, we haven't actually talked about the software in an electric vehicle, for example, and the management systems behind charging networks. So there's a whole invisible space behind and in that physical vehicle. So if we talk about digital transformation and the impact on EVs and on vehicles, on transportation systems, we have to consider the rising complexity of systems. So it's systems within systems, and you start. It's the old example of in the old days. A farmer had a tractor, and then he started monitoring. He had like some instruments to monitor the tractor. Then he had some instruments that allowed him to monitor the growth of his crops. Then he had autonomous driving tractor. Then he had a system of systems where he was like deploying multiple tractors. So the complexity is rising the whole time. And digital transformation is helping humanity deal with complexity to a large extent. So we're trying to we digitize the information